Here's today's project. I call it my Studio Stool, and I think it's one of the most iconic designs of a solid wood stool around. My particular stool is 26.5 inches tall. The top is 10 inches wide by 18 inches long, and check this out. It's a solid piece of wood. The legs, they're 1.5 by 1.5, or at least they look that way. The stretchers are 1.25 inches by 3/4, and the entire thing is held together with through mortise-wedged tenons, and they're right here, and I think it's an elegant design. What I really love about this project is that, check this out, the pile of wood that you need to make it is tiny. Do yourself a favor, just make sure you have enough parts, because if you're anything like me, you're gonna make mistakes. What we're gonna do today is build off of this drawing. We spent a lot of time to make sure we have a full drawing. You can see it has a side view, it has an end view, it has a stock list, and it also has a pattern for the curved top. Not only do we have a plan, we also have this procedure list. Trust me, if you just follow this video, these plans, and this procedure, you should have no problem building this stool. So what do you say we get to work? With a project like this, since it has a bunch of angles, we need to use our bevel. There's nothing more frustrating, at least for me, because I'm kind of inaccurate, is to take my bevel to my plan every single time that I need to cut either a jig or a part. So the way that I make sure that I don't have to worry about that anymore is I make an angle block. The way that I make the angle block first is I take my bevel and I set it to the end angle. I hold it right here on this line and I set it to this angle here, just like that. I bring it over to my blade. I'm going to roll it down until there's no daylight between the bevel and the saw blade. Another tip is you want to make sure that the bevel is at the bottom of the gullet and not sitting on a tooth. That looks pretty good. I'm going to grab my block, use my miter gauge, and cut the ends of my block. Hit the dust collector. Make sure you have hearing protection and eye protection. I'm good to go. Now that's cut. I can spin my block and make my second cut. The next cut I need to make is the side angle. So again, I just set my bevel to the angle, reset the blade again. That's perfect. This time, instead of using the miter gauge, I need to use the fence. I'm going to bring my fence over and make my rip cut. Here's our block. It's a true representation of the angles on our project. Not only that, it's the solution to a really complex problem that's going to come up later. Now it's time to make our first piece of our project. It's going to be the seat. On your procedure list, it's going to have instructions on milling, which is whenever you mill your parts, rough mill them 1 inch longer, 1/4 inch wider and thicker than needed, and let them acclimate and just kind of mill them as you need them, okay? When it comes to the seat, the first thing I need to do is just measure over 19 inches. I'm going to come over 19 inches on my blank and make a mark. I'm going to take a square and strike a line. I'm going to cut this with a circular saw because trying to cut 2-inch thick hard maple with a chop saw just isn't worth it. Now it's time to make this board flat, square, and parallel. Since it's 10 inches wide, or in this case right now, it's like 11.5. My joiner is only 8 inch, and I suppose I could cut this board in half and run 2 pieces over the joiner, but I don't want to lose the beautiful look of this piece of wood on the stool. And I thought it would be kind of cool to show you a solution right here using a planer. Obviously, you need to have a planer that's wider than the piece of wood to be able to do this. You can say I have 2 pieces of MDF on the bottom, and I'm going to put my blank on top of it. You can see how this is way out of flat. I'm going to take a wedge on one side, and I'm just going to secure it in place so it doesn't bobble. Just like that. Now that this is looking pretty good, I'm just going to set the table at the appropriate height and send it all through. Now that I have one side flat, I just need to crank the table up and make those two faces parallel. Now that I can finally see the grain on my seat blank, the first real big decision on how I want this stool to look is right here and right now. Now this is really going to blow your mind. Depending on whether the growth rings are up or down on this blank is going to determine on what the seat actually looks like. What I mean by that is if you can look at this stool that's already done, you can see that it has like this X pattern. And if you see that on the end right here, the grain, the growth rings are up. Right here I have a cutoff and the growth rings are down, and you can see that it's a circular pattern and it's exactly opposite. Since I want this grain pattern centered on my seat, it gives me an opportunity to kind of find the center of the grain that's on the surface and then measure over about 5 inches from either end. This is basically just a guess, to be honest with you, because as soon as I cut into the depth of this, I have no idea where this pattern is going to end up. But I'm hoping that it's going to end up in the middle of my seat. So now I have my mark. I'm just going to roughly draw a line on here and cut it. After I cut one edge on the bandsaw, I jointed that edge and then I cut it to width on my table saw. How I cut my blank is I'm going to slide it over, make sure it's beyond where the blade is. I'm going to clamp it down, make my cut. Flip it over, mark 18 inches, and then make my second cut. Now that our blank is ready, let's talk about making our curve. You can see on our plan it's 1 3/4 inches thick on the ends, and the curve is 1/2 inch. What's great about this plan is that you're able to just cut out the pattern that we provide, just stick it to a piece of 1/4 inch plywood, cut it out, and you're going to end up with a pattern just like this. What you want to do with this pattern is you want to basically just hold it on the side of the blank. Make sure you hold it on the end. And just transfer the line. That's done. I'm going to take my bevel and my pattern and I'm just going to hold it as close as I can to the curve, just like that. Then I take my bevel, I brought it over to my blade, and I changed the angle of my blade. I also had to take the fence and bring it to the other side of the blade. And the reason why I did that, and you're going to love this, is because I'm going to cut my blank upright. This is kind of a little dangerous, so if you don't feel comfortable holding on to it, here's a great little trick. Grab a hand screw, and you can just clamp it onto your blank, and it gives you something to hold on to. The way I'm going to cut the rest of the curve is right here at the bandsaw. What you really need to pay attention to is to make sure that the face of your blank is parallel to your blade. Make sure the tension is proper and just take your time, cut to the line, and more importantly, don't cut your fingers off. Now the last thing I need to do to clean up this face right here is with the router. I took the time to make this jig because trust me, even though it took me maybe a half an hour to make the jig, it's way quicker to make this jig and use the router than it did using all my hand tools to get right to the pattern line. And it's really pretty simple. I took the guards off so you can see what's going on, but basically it's a top bearing bit and I'm just going to butt up to it, I'm going to run it, and it's going to make a nice clean cut right to my pattern on both sides of my blank. thing we need to do is clean up our curve. And you can see how that router really made a nice reference line for me to remove the rest of this material. If you don't have a big bandsaw like I do, or a router, or even a table saw, you know what? It shouldn't stop you from being able to make this curve. You could do it with just a hand saw if you wanted to, make a bunch of relief cuts, and then just remove all that material with the chisel, and you'd basically be right where I am right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this scrub plane. What's cool about a scrub plane is it has a wide mouth and a curved blade, and I'm able to go right across the grain like this here and remove that material. And I'm just going to take my time and remove the material all the way across the seat until it gets close enough, and I'll just pick up a sander and remove the rest of the material. Right in here is pretty good. All right. From here to there. All right, that looks pretty good. So, lastly, I'm going to pick up my orbital sander. It has 80 grit paper on it. I'm just going to buzz down the rest of this until it's nice and smooth. Turn on the old drone because it's really important to make sure you get dust at the source, so I don't have to breathe it in all day. Now that our seat blank is made, we can finally talk about the joinery and the splayed legs of our project. Looking at our plan, these mortises are 2 1/4 inches in from the end. They're 1.5 inches wide. Down here you can see that it's 2 inches to the back of the mortise, still 1.5 inches, and the mortise is 1/2 inch. I basically just took all those lines and transferred them to my blank right here using the bevel. So the way these platforms work is I can take my seat blank and put it on my end platform, and then take my side platform, stick it underneath here. So now you can see it enables me to make a compound angled mortise. Trust me when I tell you, it's going to take longer for me to set all the stuff onto the mortise machine than it will be to cut it. So once I get it all set up, I'll show you how I cut it. So I have a stand-up model machine, okay, so it makes doing this a little bit easier. So you can see that I have a piece of plywood clamped and screwed down to the table. I have my side angle small block screwed to that piece of plywood. I'm going to take my big end angle, and I'm basically just going to screw it right to that smaller block, just like this. Then I'm going to screw it to the front. The thing that you need to remember when you're doing this is to make sure that the angle block is far enough underneath this big platform so it's just not, floating on this end of it. When it comes to the mortise, I have it in place. I have a stop block right here. I have to take this right here and clamp it on, because what this is going to do is going to keep this in place, all right? You're going to be amazed how many clamps I have to put on this thing. And you know what? When I first did it, this entire assembly lifted right off the table, and I was pretty unhappy. So after wrestling 5 tops worth of this, I took the time and I finally figured out how to do it right. All right, I feel pretty secure that's not going to lift up. I have to take another clamp right here in the front. And again, you need to be aware of where you're going to put this clamp, because look at it, I almost put it right in line with my handle. So I'm going to put it over here. I have my stop block set, so I know it's going to go all the way through the thickness of my material. So I'm pretty much good to go. Oh, I almost forgot one of the most important parts of this little process. So you need to make sure that the piece of plywood is wide enough that it carries the entire width of the blank, because you can see right here in the middle, there's a 1/4 inch gap. And if this piece of plywood wasn't big enough, your mortises are going to be crooked. So let me put this thing back on, and then I cut my mortises. Now that one's done, I'm just going to flip my block around and cut the other right mortise. All right, now that these ones are done, I'm just going to take the block that's underneath, put it on the other side, change the orientation of this top platform, and basically bang out the other two sides, and finally, the first piece of this puzzle is donezo. Now that our seat is done, it's time to make our legs. The legs are 1.5 inches when they're finished milled. Our challenge is how do we get these two legs that are going in two different angles parallel to the floor, parallel to the seat bottom, and to the seat top. And we do it with this little block right here. This little block represents our stool, and I'm going to show you how. So you can see that I have the side angle, remember when we cut it, and we have the end angle over here when we cut that, right? What I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to draw a line on these two outside corners, like this. And I'm going to connect the dots on the top. I mean, you're going to love this. It's going to demystify the entire process. I'll do it over here. I'm going to do it on this side here. Like that. What these lines represent are the legs of our stool, okay? Because if you can imagine this block is now in space, this is the angle of the side, and this is the angle of the end. So all I really need to do is take this block and apply it to my table saw so I can cut those angles on my leg. The way that I'm going to do it is that I need to cut my end angle. I'm going to hold it up against my saw blade, make sure it's high enough. Again, I don't want this hitting the teeth, and I'm going to change the angle of the bedangle until there's no light between my block, see, and my blade. Just like that. Well, hang on. Maybe it's just like that. All right, now I feel confident the angle of my blade is now the angle of my block, which is the angle of my legs, right? Now I'm going to crank this baby all the way down, just like that. You know, since these legs are cut on two angles, I need to figure out how to make the other angle. And I'm going to do that with this right here. I made a special crosscut boat. You can see that it's already got a curve cut here. And the way that I made it, I just put a piece of scrap hard maple on the front and the back end. And you can see that I have these guide rails right here. And it just slides into place like so. How I got the second angle was I had to cut these pieces of plywood at the side angle. You see that? So when I put the piece of plywood in on my boat, you can see that now I can cut both angles, right? So when I'm done with it, it's going to look just like this. Since I have a left and a right, and they're going to sit just like this, we really need to pay attention to what we're doing with that angle block. So let me show you how I cut the right leg first. The first thing I'm going to do is screw the angle block down to the boat, making sure it's up tight to the fence. Now I just need to raise my blade, measure from the inside face to the end of this little stick, I call an L stick, 27 1/4, all right? Just gonna hold it on the mark. Great. Now let's talk about our material. So when it came to the blanks, you can see that I've got it written down. I determined that this looks best left, this one's the right, this is the front that I'm going to be looking at. So the other side is less important to me because it's up against, you know, your bar. So this is going to be the left and this is going to be the right. So I need to take the two lefts out of here because I don't want to get confused. I'll put them over here. I know that this is the face, but I'm going to write face right on it so I don't forget. Okay? Because the face side is kind of like what everything gets measured off of. When it comes to cutting the blank, it's got to be face side down every time. Since this blade angle is the end angle and my saw doesn't go left and right, this will always stay in this orientation. So I need to figure out how to cut the left and the right leg. And what I figured out is that the top of the leg is always facing left. So I just need to make sure that this blade is high enough, just like that, and make my first cut. My second cut is really simple. I'm just going to slide my block all the way until it touches the L stick, hold it firmly in place, turn the saw on, my dust collector, make my second cut. There you go. So let me just cut the second leg, and I can talk about how I cut the shoulders. All right, now that we have both legs cut that are going to be parallel to the floor and to the seat top, what we need to do next is cut our shoulder line. We are doing a bare-faced tenon, which means that it's going straight off the back of the leg. You see that? What we need to do is we need to establish our shoulder line and our cheek line, and we need to make sure that our tenon is a 1/2 inch. So the first thing that I'm going to do over here is I'm going to measure over 2 inches from the inside face of the blade. And to be honest with you, I'm just going to go off the kerf because it's pretty tight. Measure over 2 inches. I'm going to come up 2 inches. I'm going to take the blank. I'm just going to make a little mark. There you go. I know that when I cut this, it's going to be a 2-inch tenon. Next, I need to figure out how to get the thickness of my tenon. So I got my marking gauge and I set it to a 1/2 inch. Okay. From the back side of our leg, I'm just going to make a line. Just like that. Then I'm going to come over to the blade. I'm going to lower it down. And here's a nice little tip. I'm going to lower it down past the line, okay? And then when I pick it up, I'm just going to stop just under my line at the top crown of the blade. Lock it in place. All I need to do to cut it is hold it on my mark, and that's it. There you go. I'm going to grab the other leg and do the same thing. I mean, there you go. I just love the way that, this whole thing works together to get those compound angle cuts. To get the lefts, what I'm going to do basically is I'm just going to take this off, flip it around, and instead of using an L stick, I'm going to use the fence as a stop. Now look, if this is confusing, it's okay, it should be, but look, I put a lot of time, effort, and energy into this procedure booklet, and if you just follow this thing step by step, you are definitely going to be able to get through this process. Well, the legs are starting to look like something, right? Now what we need to do is cut the cheek line, which is basically just taking out this big giant chunk. So to cut these cheeks, what I did was I came up with this cool little gizmo right here. And what it does, it basically just rides along the top of this fence, and it acts as like a tenoning jig. The way that it works is that I have a piece of plywood. It's cut on the side angle, all right? And it fits right inside like this. So I can take my leg, I can put it on here, I can secure it into place and make really great, accurate cuts over and over again. So just let me get it set up, and then I'll show you how I do it. To cut the cheek, I put the side push block into my jig and I clamped it down. And then I put the leg inside the jig and I slid it over to my blade. I lowered my blade until it was just below the shoulder line. Then I took the marking gauge, just like before, I marked it from the back side of the leg. I brought it into my jig and I slid it over to my blade until it just touched the inside face of the tooth. Now that it's all set to go, I just need to put my safety gear on and make a cut. These are the left legs. So to cut the right legs, what I need to do is I need to take this block and flip it around. Like this here. I'm gonna clamp it down and check this out. Now I can take the left leg, hold it in the jig, and it's gonna be the same orientation as the right. And since I didn't move the fence, I know that the tenon is gonna be 1/2 inch, and I can cut this thing with confidence knowing that it's not gonna pick up off my jig. Now it's time to talk about the most confusing part of this project. This is going to blow your mind. I'm going to hold my blank straight up and down, and you can see that it's nice and square, right? I'm going to take the square away. I'm going to drop it down on my newfound angle. I'm going to put the square back, and you can see that it's no longer square. And if the outside is not square, nothing else is square, right? If you look at the chair, I'm going to put a piece of scrap wood up against the outside corner of my leg. I'm going to take my straight edge, I'm going to hold it like that, and you can see how far off it is. I know it doesn't look like much, but trust me, that's a lot. So the challenge is, how do we get a mortise and tenon stretcher in these 4 legs? I suppose what you could do is make a really complex geometric shape with your mortise and tenons. Or what you can do is you can adjust the outside faces of this stool so they're in plane with each other like this. So basically all I need to do is make straight mortise and tenons. The solution to this problem is wicked easy because it's wicked smart. Well, here it is. The solution is right here. Since this is a true representation of our drawing, because again it has a side angle on it and the end angle on it, I just need to figure out how to put it next to my saw blade to get the corrected angle on the outside corners of our legs. Now watch this. I'm going to hold the side down, and I'm going to bring the end over to my blade. Make sure the end angle is up against the face of the blade. Now you see this little gap at the bottom of the blade? So I'm just going to change the angle until the face of my block is up tight to the side of my blade. Just like that. The next thing I need to do is move my fence all the way over. Since I want my legs to be 1.5 inches, I'm going to hold 1.5 inches from the fence to the inside of my blade. And I want to try to get as close to the bottom as I can. That looks pretty good. Nice. I'm going to set the height of the blade because I had it all the way up when I put the block against it, right? And the way I set the blade is I just want half this gullet right here to be coming through my material. Perfect. When it comes to cutting these 4 legs, we need to remember that we have lefts and rights. So when it comes to the rights, the tenon's going to be facing away from me. When it comes to cutting the lefts, they're going to be facing towards me. The really most important thing we need to remember here is that we're cutting the outside corner of the legs. So what I like to do, I hold it the way it's supposed to be, and then I make a mark like this on both sides. I'm cutting the outside face first here, and then I'm going to turn it clockwise to make sure that the tenon is against the fence, and then I'm going to rip the face off. All right, let me grab my gear, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I want to take a minute to talk to you about the mortises for our legs. The ones that are closest to the top are for the short stretches, which are the end stretches, and you see them on the side view of our plan. The ones that are closest to the bottom are the side stretches, and you see those from the end angle of our plan and are about 14.5 inches down from the top. It's important to make sure that you measure these down from the top or from your new shoulder line, because this may bobble a little bit and you want it to look really great, you know, in parallel with your seat. Now, when it comes to cutting these mortises, you needed to make these right here. These just represent the end angle and the side angle, just like what we've been doing this entire video. When it comes to the mortise machine, I don't know what you have, but this is the one that I have. And what you need to do is you need to put the block, right, this angle block, onto a piece of plywood and secure it to the base of your machine. You can see that I have my leg in here, and this is the right leg. I have it all clamped in place, and I'm ready to go. You can see that I have my stop block set right here, and it's up against the shoulder of my leg. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna basically drill down on my leg, and then I'm gonna take this little piece of wood right here, I'm gonna slide the leg up, I'm gonna put that in place, and drill down on it again. And what that does, it makes sure that this chisel stays in the same exact spot every time, and it really does reduce how much tear out you get on the inside face of your leg. When it comes to cutting the stretches for this project, compared to everything else we've done up to this point, they're gonna be really easy. The stock is just 3/4 thick by 1.25 inches wide. And what I do is I cut them 1/4 inch longer than what I needed on both of them, and I cut my angles. Once I cut my pieces to length, all I needed to do again was take my marking gauge and set my line. Then I raised the blade, just like I did on the leg, to the appropriate height. I moved the fence to the appropriate distance, so I had 17 inches at the bottom of my long stretcher. I made this little block that has a side angle on it, and what this does, it allows me to ride over the blade safely, because you can see that this piece is really tiny, and I just can't go over the blade because it would be really dangerous. And I don't actually trust a miter gauge, so this push block makes it really simple. I have one for the side angle, and I have one for the end angle for the short stretchers. And then I'm going to use the same block in the upright position to cut my cheek line. The last things I needed to do before assembly was cut relief cuts in all the tenons, and then cut a whole bunch of wedges. When it comes to gluing up this project, the first thing I needed to do was glue the end stretcher to the legs. Since it's on an angle, it makes for a challenge. What I had to do is cut these little blocks right here at the side angle, and they're really, really helpful. Now, sometimes that they move, so you can see that I have these ones and they have some sandpaper glue to them. I have a couple of clamps, I have my glue, and I have some acid brushes. What I'm going to do is basically just dip it in the glue and just put a thin coat on the inside of my mortise, all right? Just like that. Now I take my stretcher with no glue on it, and I just set it in there and I take the excess glue off. I do the same to the other side. And you can probably notice I'm not getting stressed out, right? So now I'm going to set the other side like this here. I have a rag with some water on it. I'm going to wipe off the excess glue. I'm going to take my glue blocks, and you can see that they're in the opposite direction of the angle. I'm going to grab a clamp, and I'm just going to put a little pressure on it. You can see right here that's an appropriate amount of pressure because it's hitting on the bottom corner of the stretcher, but there's a gap on the top. So I'm just going to grab these ones, put them in the same orientation, and hope that they're not going to slip around. And I'm just watching the shoulder line of my stretcher. I can see that it's pretty tight. Looks really, really good right here. You see that? I'm going to take a couple of these little wedges, and what I did was I basically just cleaned up the edge of them so it's got a nice sharp point to it, so I can just jam it in the slot. Little dab will do ya. And I'm just going to start them, no problem. See? I got to grab the persuader. Here we go. This is a staple for any kind of fine furniture making right here. I'm just going to start each one of these wedges until they bottom out. All right, that side's done. Now I'm just going to repeat the process over here. And look, you can see that this stuff's starting to bobble around in real time, and that's just the way that it goes. But I'm not going to let it stress me out. And I think that's really the key when it comes to doing any type of glue up. Just deal with whatever's going on, make the adjustments as needed, and continue. Grab a couple more of these little wedges. Yep. Give them a little bath. That looks pretty good. Start them in the slots. That looks good. Keep an eye on the shoulder. Drive them in. All right. That's basically it, all right? Now the last thing I need to do, cut off the wedges, clean them up, make sure that everything's flush on the outside until it looks just like this one here. Now the legs are all done. They're looking pretty good. I cleaned them all up. It's time to deal with the seat. And I'm just going to break the edges of this thing just like that, mainly so I don't get cut, because you guys know that this stuff is pretty sharp, right? There we go. I feel pretty confident now I can wrestle with this thing. It's not going to cut me. I'm going to start gluing the entire project up together at once. And the first thing I'm going to do is put glue inside the seat mortises. And I got to be honest with you, you don't really even need glue for this project, because the splayed legs keep everything under tension, and those wedges certainly keep everything under tension. But the glue, for me, it hides a lot of the little gaps I might have around my joinery. There we go. Now I'm gonna, believe it or not, just put my seat down like this here. And I know the glue is dripping on my bench. That's okay with me. The way that I'm gonna attach the short stretchers is I need to put glue inside their tenons as well. A little dab will do you. I'm starting to make a mess. But that's okay. I'm just pumped to finally put this thing together. I'm just gonna remember which way they go. Shoulders on the outside. The angle is this way. That's pretty good. I'm gonna do the same to this one here. Goes in this way. All right. Slap some glue in here. That's pretty good. Do the same to this one. Don't worry about it. Just glue. It cleans up. There we go. What I need to do is I need to start these tenons, and look, I'm starting to wrestle, right? That's just the way that it is. Whoop. Like I said, this is not easy. This is an easy part. There we go. But if you dry fit this thing properly, all this stuff is going to fit. Now, I just can't slam all this stuff home because it won't fit into the mortises of the top because they're at angles. So what I need to do is tip it upside down and hope this stuff stays together long enough until I can start my leg tenons. There you go. And you can see that they're under tension a little bit, right? There we go. Nice. So finally, I can take a little aggression out on this project because it's been a bear to build this thing. All the compound angles, all the crazy jigs, all the thinking around that table saw will make you nuts. So this part is going to be very, very satisfying. I got my earplugs in, and I'm just going to start these legs to make sure they don't bounce out. Lay it on the side, and give it a little smash. Flip it over. Do the same thing. I'm just going to continue to do this. It's actually fun. Yeah, I can feel it coming together finally. Now, all right, I gotta slow down. Stuff's starting to fly all over the place. That's okay. Got a little carried away with the glue, but that's okay, you know? Here we go. What I'm doing is I'm making sure that these legs are gonna sit tight on the bottom of the seat, just like that. So I feel confident that the tops look really good. You can see the top of the seat, all the tenons are through. There's a little bit of glue. And to be honest with you, I have plenty of time to close up this. What I need to concentrate on is getting these to be closed up. So this one's a little stubborn. I don't mind picking up the regular hammer. I'm just going to start to work it down. You see that? It's starting to pop through. No problem. I mean, I'm really not afraid to pick up this hammer. But look at that. I mean, that is so satisfying to see the shoulder lines of these short stretchers perfectly in line with these legs at that corrected angle. I mean, it's so satisfying. I really hope you build this because the feeling is really pretty awesome. I mean, I feel as though I don't even need a clamp at this point. Let me get a little bit of glue. What happened to all the talk of me saying everything needs to be well thought out and methodical and all that stuff? I mean, look at me. I'm making a mess. All right, I'm just going to eyeball that shoulder line and just drive those wedges in until I hear them bottom out. I'm going to do the same to these ones over here. All right, that's looking pretty good. Check the shoulder line. Man, that looks good. I'm just lucky that it's not bouncing, you know what I mean? You hear that? It bottomed out already. Next, I just need to cut those off. I have this old saw that I don't mind using. I don't mind getting glue on it. All right, that's pretty good. Do the same to these ones over here. And the reason why I do it now is so I can flip the stool over and it won't be balancing on those wedges. Again, I'm going to check the shoulder lines right here and here. I hate to say it, but I can't believe how great they look. And I don't even have a clamp on them. So get some glue. Start these wedges right here. Repeat the process. Nice. Couple more. Perfect. I might as well cut them off while I'm here, right? And stupid things happen when you're doing woodworking. Like, I've raked my arm across one of these, believe it or not, you know? Okay. The last thing I need to do is make sure that the seat is sitting down on my shoulder line. And I can see this one over here. It's definitely not where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to pick up the rubber persuader first. Look at that. Now this one's looking really, really good. I know the other three aren't, but this one's looking good. So I'm just going to put a couple wedges in this one. Now remember, it's going off in 2 angles, so you have to kind of put the wedge in the same direction, right? Yeah, that looks great. Now, obviously, this one right here isn't working out so well. So I'm going to spin it towards me, grab a clamp. I can apply a little pressure to it, and look at that. It closes right up. I'm just going to repeat the process. Make a mess with the glue. Get these 2 wedges and put them in. I swear, I put my glasses on off and on all day. One of those things, there we go. That's looking pretty good. The price is getting old, right, everybody? Nice. I'll spin it around and do the same thing over here. Nice. The last one, now this one sucks, but that's okay. Watch this, a little pressure. Perfect. All right, that is it. Let's check it out. Man, this thing is super solid, and I know it's not gonna come apart unless somebody breaks it, you know what I mean? Now, the last thing we need to do is clean up all these surfaces, and I can talk about why it's a little wobbly and the finish. But I gotta tell you what, this is so satisfying. So here's our project in all its glory. I think that the maple looks great. The last couple of things I needed to do here was basically just clean up all the joinery, clean up all the glue I got all over this project and all over my bench, and I needed to make sure that it didn't wobble. The way that I did that was I brought it to my table saw and I just worked on the bottom of the 2 legs that were high until it sat flat. Then I took some sandpaper and I cleaned up all the surfaces. I broke all the edges so it was nice and smooth, especially the part where my legs are going to be. And then I applied a nice thin coat of polyurethane. I cut it in half with some mineral spares and I just used a rag. I let it dry, I knocked it back with some sandpaper and I applied another coat. The greatest thing about woodworking for me are the takeaways with every project that I build. I know that most people will never understand the complexities of these outside corrected angles. I just did it and I barely understand it. I'm just so grateful that little block showed me how to do it. But you can take everything that I tried to teach you here and apply it to other projects in your shop, right? And I think that the biggest takeaway on this project for me were all the jigs necessary to build it. It took longer to build all those jigs than the actual piece. And what they're really for is to make sure that I can make accurate, repeatable cuts, and most importantly, it's a really safe way to make all these cuts. Now listen, I know we covered a ton of ground on this project, and if you're feeling a little confused or overwhelmed, don't worry about it because it comes with a full drawing and an in-depth procedure list that's definitely going to help you get out of the weeds in the shop, all right? Don't worry, I got your back. Now listen, if you build this right here, I'm going to consider you a wicked smart woodworker too. Take it easy.